When it comes to creating a scattergram, a lot of people have issues with the search, the export file, or something kind of on the technical end. But once they've created it, the next question we have to ask ourselves is it a good scattergram? Is it one that's ready to use for pricing? And when it comes to that, there's one question we really have to ask. And that question is there strong correlation? So what we define correlation as is the trend line is up and to the right when you read from left to right. And strong means that the dot dispersion, or the sold homes represented by those blue dots, are fairly close to the trend line. So really we have to ask ourselves first, is there correlation and is it strong, right? So is there strong correlation? It has two little pieces to it, but if we go by this simple question and really just do this check, we'll be good to go. So for example with that, what if you look at it and there's not correlation? Right, meaning that the graph looks kind of like this. It's down and to the right. Well, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and check and make sure that there's not a limit on the data of plus or minus 10% square feet or something close to that. Again, we want to make sure we're searching for a wider area of square footage. We're just searching by the area in general, in many cases the neighborhood. You can see here that this is limited much more than the square feet. Expand this and we'll probably fix our correlation issue. Other times though, if that doesn't exist, we want to make sure we have the same property type, meaning we're not doing detached homes and attached homes in the same graph. We want to make sure we don't have any crazy outliers like a home that's foreclosed on that's pulling one end way down or something. Or we wanted to go ahead and change our x-axis variable to fix it. Now in most cases, if you walk this process, first making sure your property type is the same. You look at the extreme outliers, and if there aren't any, you just try x-axis variables. Almost every single time this will fix it. But there are cases where you won't see this fix it. And in most of those cases, the reason why is the properties are not comparable, not because of the area or the size of the home, but because of what's been done to the home or unique features. So for example, this house here you can see is not correlated, meaning the trend line is down and to the right. Now we tried this one and we looked at it and said, hey, all these are detached homes. There's some outliers down low, for example, one under contract here, one for sale up here. And we look at those and we see that this one doesn't have anything crazy with it. This one here is on a lake, so it gives it special, unique kind of value, but nothing that really screams this is why that trend line is messed up for us. So we look at that and we say, okay, we tried other things like finished square feet, finished square feet above ground, and nothing changed. The line was still down to the right. Maybe the angle of it changed a little bit, but it still was down to the right. Now the reason why is when we started looking at the data closer, and this is one of those rare situations, what we found was there are actually multiple trend lines. And the way we find that is we look at every one of these little properties, which in many cases you won't need to do, but in this case we had to. And what we found is these homes here all had much upgraded features. These ones down here did not. And the one up here again was on the water, so that's one that's kind of like the outlier we can kind of exclude. Now, you might say, okay, but how blatant is this going to be C? Like, how would I know that this is the thing that moves the needle? Well, in this case, for example, homes in the lower trend looked like this. Homes in the upper trend with the upgraded features looked like this. It's not going to be something subtle. It's not going to be one little small thing that you just can't see easily. If there's this big of a difference here between these two trend lines, it will be blatant. It will be something that can't be either quantified just without looking at it sometimes, but it will stand out to you. So in this case, we had to create our own trend lines here, and we drew these parallel to each other because that's the way that we have to do it. And now we have a good, strong correlation on this. But let's say we had correlation, but it wasn't strong, but it wasn't one of those multiple trend lines scenarios, let's say. Well, the first thing we want to do on this one then is jump right to the changing the x-axis variables, and then we'll look closely at the outliers. Now, if it still isn't working, we can draw an estimated trend line, but in most cases, it works pretty well. So for example, this here is for the neighborhood called English Ranch, and we're looking at total square feet. You can see here that the line is up and to the right, meaning that there is correlation, but you can see that these sold dots are not necessarily on top of the line or very close. Now remember, the first thing we do is change the x-axis variables. If we don't do that first, we could be led astray. So in this case, for example, if we first looked at this and said, well, mentally I can take this line, draw it up here, and put a line up on this top 4, and put a line on these bottom 4, cool, perfect multiple trend line. That would actually lead us astray in this case. That's why you change the x-axis variable first. If it doesn't change or doesn't improve, then we can look for those property identifiers that would be, very obvious for multiple trend lines. In this case, changing from the x-axis from total square feet to finished square feet gave us a pretty strongly correlated line. The only difference here being this guy down here that is a clear outlier. Now, in this case, these are all detached homes, so the same property type as well, but this one down here is technically a patio home, while the rest here are a little bit larger lot, more standard homes. So you might say that one doesn't really compare, so you could remove that, which would then make this trend line even stronger in its correlation. But again, that's the process. It's x-axis variable first, then outlier. Now again, if we looked at that and still didn't find any answers, then we can look for that multiple trend lines. We draw those kind of like we did before, based on that unique identifying thing. They have to be parallel, and they have to be identified by that unique characteristic. Again, jumping back, on this example, we drew these ourselves using the just simple line tool in the software, drew them in, made them parallel, but again, we did that pretty obvious based on the difference here. So remember, the question we're asking ourselves, come all the way back here, is there strong correlation? So is the trend line up and to the right, and is the dot dispersion pretty close? Most cases you'll find a graph when you first start looks much closer to this than anything else. Now you might get lucky and start out with a perfectly strong correlated line, and if you do, you're good to go. If you see something like this, again, remember we're going to change the x-axis first, really kind of alternating between total square feet, finished square feet, and above ground finished square feet, and find that number that gives you a much stronger correlation. And then from here, you're ready to go on and use it for pricing to find your base price, and then use that to find your competitive range. But again, if you can't find an answer to that, start looking for those very unique things that could point to a multiple trend line situation.